hands here.
This is less of educational and more informational as far as sharing information, sharing knowledge. Y'all know that I'm not a lifelong gardener. I think you guys have more experience gardening than I do. Most people do. But what I've learned about container gardening over the last, oh my gosh, just the last few weeks, you know, combined with the last, since I started this garden project up here, is that it's not a matter of if you should plant things in containers. It's when to use them and what is best suited for containers versus in the ground. And the answer is different depending on your gardening needs. Last year, Matt and I pulled out what he thought was a weed out of the neighbor's yard. I don't know if I told y'all this story before, but he thought it was a weed, and it's really funny when you pull something out and you look at it and you think, why is there a weed attached to this peach pit? The first thought was that it was a weed, not that, oh, this is a peach growing out of the peach pit.
Right.
And so I brought it inside, I put it in one of those party cups with some dirt, and quickly outgrew the need for that little container. And then I put it in a terracotta pot where it stayed for about a year. We brought it up here to the garden at the beginning of last year, and it stayed there until I could figure out where I wanted to plant it. So for me, that is one of the first reasons I like using containers to garden. I like to, you can put something in a pot or another vessel of some sort until you know where you want to put it. It gives you options. We also similarly had blueberries that first of all, I thought you could grow blueberries in a pot, and once I learned that you couldn't, it's like, okay, well, I'll leave them in the pot until I can figure out the sun, how it's coming, what the plant's requirements are, that sort of thing. And so, like the peach tree, those stayed in a pot until they found their new home. This year, we've planted the peach. It's out there in the field by the bicycle garden, and the blueberries are over there in the corner.
And why can't you go grow blueberries in a container?
Blueberries and peach trees, unless you're trying to just keep it as a small plant,
right,
their root requirements, they need a lot of space. Most trees, actually, that peach tree is going to get about 15 feet tall, and in order to get that tall, it needs to have a significant root system that you're not going to get in a pot. However, that doesn't mean that you can't keep a tree in a pot as a house plant.
Right.
But it just requires more care. So back to, what is your intention for that plant? Matt and I were gifted, it's a maple. I think it's a Japanese maple.
Yeah, they don't get really big.
They do.
No, they do.
They can.
They can.
Jason has huge ones.
So we were gifted one in an 18-inch pot, and the plant was about 18 inches. So this was a nice size. I could carry this little, but because the guy that gave it to us, his desire for container gardening was to bonsai his plants, which is a discipline that I don't have. It's not just keeping it small, it's the art of pruning it in a specific way so that the top of the tree and the bottom of the tree, the root system, stay in balance. When he gave it to us, we took it out, dug a hole, threw it in, and now it's 10, 12, 15 feet tall. Okay. It's huge.
It's not a little bonsai anymore.
It's not a little bonsai anymore, but so you could keep a peach as a plant, and you could probably keep a blueberry as a plant, but if your goal is to get fruit off of those trees, they can't stay in.
Well, I see with a tree, I just didn't think of a blueberry having that big of a root system.
Well, neither did I, but once I learned that they get about 5 feet tall and 5 feet in diameter, I thought, oh, okay, well, then this isn't a good. Now, there might be a container large enough for it, but then you have to ask yourself, is it worth it?
Right.
So at my house, I have 2 blueberries that are growing well, and they have faux containers. I built a box around them, but there's no bottom.
Oh, okay.
So that it could grow down and grow into the ground and get what it needs, but it looks like, they both look like they're in containers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Another tree, though, that you would want to keep in a pot all the time is a lemon tree.
My daughter has a lemon tree.
Do you know why she keeps it in a pot?
Well, it came in a pot, and she's moved 2 or 3 times.
So that's a really excellent reason. When you move a lot, if
Right.
you're somebody that moves a lot for work, you know, the military, or just indecisiveness even, is a great reason to keep things in containers. But citrus trees in Georgia can't withstand the winter.
Right, she brings it in. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
being able to bring your plants in, that are frost sensitive in the area that you live in is an awesome way to is an awesome reason to keep them in containers, because you're going to preserve them.
Right, it's done really well too. It's probably 6 or 7 years old, and she's moved a few times. But she brings it in every year. Her boyfriend gave it to her. She's married now, got a 1-year-old, but I guess her husband doesn't care.
Or doesn't
Well,
remember.
he's the one that carries it in and out of the house.
I love it. Well, but lemon trees, unlike peach trees, aren't designed to get 15 feet
Right,
tall.
right.
You've got dwarf varieties that can stay 2 feet tall
Right,
and still put off lemons.
right.
So it really does depend on what the plant is meant to do, and how long you want to keep it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't put a lemon tree in the ground.
Right,
I just wouldn't do it here
right.
in our climate,
It wouldn't work.
because I wouldn't want to have to go out and fuss with it during the winter. Trying to keep it warm, and I would just be worried.
Right.
So last year we brought
The pineapple.
the pineapple up here that I had been growing in a pot for 5 years. I was growing it as a house plant.
Yeah.
You can get, if you don't know how to prune the plant though, and the plant's requirements needs a larger base for the roots, you run into the problem of it becoming root bound. Have you ever experienced that, where you take the plant out, and what's happening when those roots are wrapping around the outside, they have nowhere to go, they become suffocated, and it will end up killing the plant.
Yeah.
So
You can cut those when you pull it out, though. Cut
the roots,
The
I
roots
usually
that are
just
bound.
loosen them.
but
Yeah.
that implies that you're
Spread
not
out.
going to keep it in the container.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to keep it in the container, you'd have to properly prune. Well, hello there. You'd have to properly prune the plant so that the upper part that's out of the ground maintains that ratio to the roots in the ground. Do you know what that's called?
Well, you have the drip line. which
Drip
is-
line, that's what you
the
called it.
outside edge of the crown of the tree.
Okay.
At the top. And then, normally your roots are sometimes as much as twice that far from the trunk to the drip line.
Uh-huh.
And then another whole, sometimes even further than that.
So with the case with the pineapple, I had this pot here, and as a house plant, my plant was out to here. Don't come real close because it would poke you in the eye.
Right.
And I didn't know how to prune it, and so from my thinking along those lines is I'll try it again, maybe, but only to keep it as a house plant and not to be disappointed when it dies.
Well,
Okay.
I have a plant that I can't figure out what to do with. I've obviously neglected it. It's in a pot that's only about this big. It was from my dad's funeral 13 years ago. And it was just one. Now it's got like 3 different limbs, but one grew out and up like this, and it's probably 5 feet tall, but as long as I keep it watered and it gets sun, it's fine. But I'm afraid if I try to pull it out, then I'm going to break it just trying to handle it to put it in something else.
What kind is it?
I don't know the name of it, but it's one of those funeral plants. It's just like some type of palm, little green leaves. It doesn't flower.
Yeah, I have one that has been his mother's.
Yeah,
It was like this.
Right.
I keep repotting it, making it
yeah.
bigger.
I've
It's
never changed the
really
pot.
tall now.
Yeah, mine
and
is
full
too.
and full. So you
Right.
just take it
And
out
I'm sure
put
it's
it-
root bound.
We'll take it out and put it in a bigger pot.
Yeah, I'm afraid I'll break it. It's so
Be
cumbersome.
careful.
Well, then in that case, as long as it's doing well, there's the saying,
Yeah,
if
well,
it ain't
I've been
broke,
doing that
don't
for
fix
a
it.
few years. 13 years now.
Poor thing.
Well, you can also then just try pruning off the new growth, leaving the original intact, taking off the side shoots and potting those, or getting those to root in water. and then at least you're saving the original
part of it.
the
anyway,
original
yeah.
plant. Another reason that container gardening is high on my list is to contain the plant. Like, I know that sounds a little too on the nose, but there are some things that are just invasive that you don't want growing everywhere. You don't want them all over your yard or your patio or your garden. Mint, strawberries.
Chives, I just read does that too.
If somebody would have told me about blackberries before I planted them, I wouldn't have planted them. I'd have left them in a nice sized pot. But now I have runners 20 feet away from the original plant.
Yeah.
And I'm not all that delighted about it.
Right.
They're coming up everywhere.
Yeah.
So being able to contain what you're growing in a space that says, I love you, I just don't love you that much. Then when it comes to choosing containers, not everybody has the same aesthetic in mind. There's concrete planters, and there's terracotta pots, and then there's these really unsightly plastic pots that you would be surprised at how well they could look with a can of spray paint.
Right.
A very inexpensive fix, and it will change the look of your garden. You can get creative with things that you have around your house, but I would caution you that if you're going to use something that wasn't intended for gardening in the first place, that you do a little bit of research to make sure that the material is safe and it's not going to leach,
Right.
be poisonous into, and it's going to hold up. If the container is outside, obviously you wouldn't want to use something that's not going to hold up. And no matter what kind of container you use, drainage is important. You must have drainage holes throughout all of your containers, or your plants are just going to go swimming and not recover.
Something that you want it to be like a marginal plant, something that can stand in water, like some iris, Mexican primrose, pitcher plants, things like that really want to be real soggy.
So that is an excellent point. You're absolutely right, because a container I hadn't considered until you just said that is a pond.
That's true.
It is not the first thing people think of when they say container gardening. You think of pots and things that are on Pinterest,
Right.
these really unique ways of holding your stuff. But a pond or people that are into the aquaponics, that is a way that you wouldn't want drainage, because then it would defeat the purpose of having
keep the water in.
Yeah, you want to keep the water in. So thank you, Jason. That is an excellent point that I hadn't considered. I like to have the containers for a variety, like probably all of these reasons, but one of the best ones, they just look pretty. It's visually interesting to have your garden planted at different heights, different levels. We have pots hanging off the fence here. We have some we have some pots over there, a tire, a concrete planter, and a basket on the bike with lots of plants in it. We have this pot over here with that water, and inside the pot is a little watering can planter that somebody donated, and it's holding an echinacea. I think just to have the visual interest and not everything be so flat, so boring. There are some disadvantages though of the container gardening that I found. You're not likely to get them all on a watering line, like a drip system or an irrigation system like you can with in-ground gardening. So you're gonna spend a little bit more time maybe with caring for them. But if you only have one or two, it's completely doable. If you have a few hundred, you might want to consider taking the plunge and digging a hole and sticking those plants in the ground. Would you agree? Okay, she says I think so.
Yeah, they tie you down. Yeah. One year I wouldn't go to the women's retreat because I didn't have anybody to water my plants, and they said, "Oh, we'll buy you some new plants." I'm like, I got 60 something. You gonna replace all of those?
Goodness.
But so it did take me a lot of time to water them every day.
And you have a really excellent reason for container gardening. You garden on your deck so that deer don't eat.
Right. And the soil is old riverbed. We tried to garden when we first moved there because we have over an acre. It's plenty of land, but things grew about this tall and matured. And then the rabbits and the deer ate it anyway.
Right. So people that have poor soil or poor grading, my neighbor across the street, it's like a hill in their backyard. They may have 3 feet of flat, and then the pitch goes up.
Right.
And I've seen people where the pitch goes way down. It's a slope, and you can't grow anything there.
Right.
So my daughter, she has almost all shade in her backyard and all sun in the front yard. So she'll have things that she moves back and forth depending on the season to get the sun requirements that she needs. You don't own the property that you're in. You're renting, or it's temporary containers all day long. One of the biggest advantages I have found, though, about the keeping things in pots versus having them in the ground, traditional, and you can do this for food, herbs, flowers, you're not walking up near them. At your house, you have things everywhere, and it's beautiful. But if you get too close and you're stepping on, not just stepping on the plants, that's tricky enough, but when you get close, you're compacting the soil. So having some definition, even if you can't put everything in containers, but kind of contain around them with rocks or pavers or stepping stones, can help those plants not get compacted. Do y'all have any questions, or do you have any other stories that you want to share about containers that you've experimented with? What you love, what you hate?
I've seen where they say, if you got a big container, you don't need that whole depth. Putting things like plastic bottles and things in the bottom, and then your dirt level. But does that allow the water, because when you have excess water, you want that water to come up and continue to feed the plant. But if it's like in plastic, would it still do that? Or would you have water just sitting in the bottom?
Well,
if you don't have drainage holes.
It's still,
you need drainage holes.
Yeah.
You won't be able to water from the bottom
No.
because you'll have that air void.
That's what I thought.
Right.
That's what I do with my bigger pots. And then I had one, and I didn't really think about it. I planted a small palm tree and kept it in the house over the winter, put it back outside, and now it's starting to mature a little bit, and I kind of pulled the mulch back, and the roots are just everywhere. And I notice if I don't water it every single day, it's starting to, and I thought that probably could have used dirt all the way down, and then I could have put it on my saucer. And
Well, some things you don't know until you do it. I didn't. That's gardening. I did not know. I have seen, and I even did a workshop last year on herb gardening in mason jars, and it just, for me, it just didn't work. I don't know if it's because the would you call it, like the collar goes inward, like more like a vase, where it tapers up on those bottles instead of having the wide mouth. I don't know if that caused a restriction for the plant in some way, but they didn't work. You just have to experiment. So you can fill, I would, if it's a big pot, I would absolutely fill it with scraps around the house, bubble wrap, empty bottles, whatever, and then do something maybe on top of it, like a piece of styrofoam, and then fill it with the dirt. But I'd still have drainage holes at the bottom so that the plant can get what it needs. The excess will be drained out. And then if I find, this plant really could have used, like Jason was saying, could have used a deeper planting, then you're gonna have to, repot it.
That's right.
Repot it, or figure out how to keep it smaller.
even now, just moving it in and out of the house, it's so heavy.
Right, that's
If I'm
another
going to add
problem.
another
Why are you moving it in and out? Is it
in the wintertime, it's
okay?
palm tree.
I gotcha.
oh, your mason jar. I really wonder if it's because it's so solid and, like you said, it tapers in.
Yep.
And there's no oxygen getting
Right.
into that, into the lower parts
Right.
whatsoever.
Could be.
Aquariums, I know you have to have as much surface area in ponds too as you do depth, because that's where the gas exchange and stuff. Tell the dog here flying. But anyway, so yeah, by restricting that, you may be starving the soil of oxygen.
Right. But to just wing it, ask other people, and
Trial and error.
And sometimes you just have to accept the fact that growing a palm tree in Georgia is hard. And if it depends on how bad you want it. I'm growing a mango in my kitchen. Now, it'll never get bigger than it is because I'll never pot it up. It'll either die or it'll continue on as a house plant. But a mango can get up to 90 feet tall.
Wow.
But never in one season, not here.
Right.
It would take so much longer to reach maturity. It would die from the cold if you put it outside.
Right.
So some things you just have to accept. If I'm going to live in this climate and I'm going to grow this item in a container, this is what I'm going to get.
Right.
A lot of headache. But it's worth it to have a palm that you can, I think.
Yeah, I was trying to do a little tropical area by the front door, just because I came from Hawaii and Joy came from the Philippines, so just
Right.
to try to, we remember this. Feel at home.
Right. I saw something different recently, and I left my phone in the car, but it said to cut up tinfoil and like for container plants and put strips in it, and it would attract more light. It was also supposed to be a deterrent for some kind of bugs. I'll have to
Well,
find it.
That would be good. I did that to keep my cats out of it.
That's awesome.
Keep critters out.
I have heard that copper, and I'm not sure, I think it's called copper rings that you would put at the base of certain plants is supposed to be a deterrent for slugs. So I've never heard,
Slugs,
I
so I
have
just don't
heard
remember.
copper and slugs.
but I've never
This was
heard
just
tinfoil.
foil. Yeah,
I
just
love
cut
that.
it up in strip, which is also supposed to sharpen your scissors.
Okay. Now, if the wind doesn't take the tinfoil away,
Yeah,
You
well,
might-
it talked about some mulch too, so I guess you would kind of stick down the mulch a little bit. I don't know.
that sounds like a fun
I
experiment.
put it around the bottom of some tomatoes one time because it ended up, by the time it got to be summertime and the sun was straight overhead, the last couple of tomato plants I had were in the shade most of the day. So I put the foil underneath to kind of reflect just a little more light to them. But I think that the experiments that they did, there's like a red, brown a sheet of red stuff that you would plant the tomato plants through, and something about that color, I guess the red is what's being reflected back out of it, that made the tomatoes do better.
Well, I appreciate this almost seems like it could be a garden myth busting workshop that we could maybe do next month or so. I actually believe that,
You've heard.
huh?
Weird things you've heard.
Weird things you've heard, and let's try them.
Right. Well, I'm gonna try the foil.
Let's try them in the garden. We could have a planting day where we trial that. I will say that next month the workshop will be hosted by Casey Spinks. She's a master gardener with the Gwinnett County UGA Extension Office. I can't remember all of where it goes together. And she's going to be talking to us about pollinators. What they are, why we need them, how to attract them, and that kind of thing. So that's really all my 2 cents on container gardening, what I've learned, and I appreciate y'all sharing your thoughts with me as well. Thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it.
Thank you.